Hello, I'm Elliot and I'm here to present the pros and cons of rewilding as a solution to farmland abandonment. According to UN figures, an area of farmland the size of the UK is abandoned globally every 2 years. This is down to factors ranging from low productivity of the land to the migration of younger people into cities. But consequently, the fate of the abandoned land is the subject of intense debate. Now, historically, landowners have tackled the problem via one of three management strategies, being intensification, extensification, which is increasing farm size by consolidating the farmland, and afforestation. Now, the relatively new concept of rewilding offers a more passive strategy. Ideally requiring no management, rewilding means allowing land and ecosystems to return to a self-sustaining natural state with minimal or no human intervention. However, since the term first appeared in print in 1998, no single universally accepted definition of rewilding has emerged. So, encompassing species reintroductions, taxon substitutions, translocations, restorations, successions, de-extinctions, de-domestications, and concepts of naturalness, wildness, and wilderness, it seems there are almost as many debates on what rewilding is as to how to go about it. Passive rewilding simply means letting nature retake its course unimpeded, as initially occurs after land abandonment. Now, this would be rewilding in its purest sense, but even the most fervent idealists have to accept that in our climatically changing world, human influence is pretty much inescapable. Active rewilding, on the other hand, involves restoring ecosystems using human intervention to reset or maintain the processes. Within that, we've also got trophic rewilding, whereby megafauna are introduced at the top of the food chain to re-establish trophic cascades. The concept was championed by journalist George Monbiot, who did much for the cause of rewilding with his 2013 book Feral and his popular TED Talk describing, amongst other things, how the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park changed not only the food chain, but the course of its rivers. Another idea, Pleistocene rewilding, aims to recreate ecosystems from the species-rich Pleistocene era. This involves reintroducing large herbivores to abandoned areas to temper vegetative succession and establish pre-agricultural habitat mosaics, which is obviously ideal for biodiversity or increasing biodiversity. This is already underway in large-scale experimental projects such as the bison-friendly Pleistocene Park in Siberia and Oostvaardersplassen in Holland, which introduced de-domesticated cattle and ponies as substitutes for extinct aurochs and wild horses. Now, the latter met with controversy in both 2005-2010 when harsh winters led to mass starvations and caused public outcry. The ensuing court case, which was kicked all the way up to the government, found that the animals were effectively wild and thus not covered by any animal welfare legislation, so nobody was ever held accountable. However, given that the overarching ethos of rewilding is to let nature take its course, surely the more active the strategy, the more artificial the manifestation of wild that results. And taking that debate a little bit further, there's a breeding programme, the Tauros programme in Europe, which aims to replace the extinct aurochs generally with a selectively bred variety of cattle. But in what sense are these animals deemed to be wild? Skeptics would also argue that our current ecosystems have actually been shaped by humans over thousands of years, and that the communities therein could be adversely affected by reintroducing long-missing taxa, which is fair enough. And no matter how persuasive the aesthetic argument, any rewilding plans must clearly strike a balance between the philosophical, the political, and the practical. There's obviously a need to accept degrees of intervention, and there's certainly a need for experimentation. The input of local communities is also very important before leaving nature to retake its course. Local attitudes are particularly relevant to the reintroduction of megafauna, and particularly carnivores. So where the introduction of beavers to various areas of the UK has been broadly welcomed and proclaimed a success, proposals for a similar repatriation of wolves in Scotland has met with general antipathy, owing primarily to the potential risks posed to humans and livestock. And the counter-argument for wolves as a form of biological control for deer is currently outweighed by the risk factor. Research also shows that 70% of reintroductions fail, so any rewilding project must therefore be considered an experiment with all the uncertainty and potential disappointments that entails. In traditional conservation terms, land abandonment is further generally considered detrimental to biodiversity, in Europe at least, although the opposite view is taken in the Americas. But if increasing diversity is not the aim, then rewilded areas may provide economic benefits, such as from ecotourism, and also bolster ecosystem services such as soil preservation, carbon sequestration, and water regulation. Yet the prospect of leaving nature unchecked is met with opposition, even there, especially amongst local populations again, with the reversion of traditional agricultural landscapes to forest being perceived as a reduction in its cultural value. However, there's always a counter-argument, as with a replanting programme at Carriffran in the Scottish borders, which shows a marked difference between its 1999 start of the replanting regime and 2015, when the second picture was taken. Many other schemes also involve the replanting of trees with the environmental benefits that I've just mentioned. And as an alternative, potentially subsidised form of land management, rewilding through tree planting certainly presents a workable solution for abandoned areas. But is this a return to nature, or is it simply, as some people have put it, landscape gardening on a large scale? But as long as there are clear and aesthetic benefits, and ecological benefits obviously, does it really matter? Some maintain that rewilding should only be considered as a last resort for abandoned land, when agricultural adjustment tactics have failed and all other economic possibilities have been exhausted. Ostensibly, rewilded land could be made profitable by applying a high nature value farming principles, such as at the Net Castle estate in Sussex, which has turned a considerable profit since adopting that policy. However, there's always going to be legal implications whenever a rewilded area is put to commercial use. So the prospect of a greener, more species-rich world is clearly of global appeal. But this has to be balanced against the needs of an ever-growing human population and the reality of irreversible environmental change. There can be little argument that rewilding as a form of land use, or rather non-use, is conceived with the best intentions. But with human impact inescapable, even the most passive approach requires rigorous planning and monitoring. So as a solution to farmland abandonment, rewilding represents an environmental opportunity that really does deserve to be pursued, albeit with the utmost care.